Hello, friends. Today I am joined by Carrie de Francisco, who is a wife and retired homeschooling mom of two homeschool graduates living and learning in Southern California. She's the host of the homeschool podcast, Coffee with Carrie, a speaker and author of several books, including Just Breathe and Take a Sip of Coffee and Homeschool High School, a handbook for Christian education. Through Carrie's consulting services, books, online courses, blog articles, and podcast, she helps moms simplify their homeschooling one step at a time, one day at a time, and one cup of coffee at a time. I like that. Carrie is an out of the box thinker, which is probably why she was an outside of the curriculum box homeschooler, which I love. Those who have been around here for a while know I'm a fan of textbook free learning whenever possible. Carrie, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your family and how you originally got started homeschooling?
Well, thank you again for having me on. This is going to be so much fun because, like you, I love my coffee and I love conversation. So this is going to be great. Well, you already said I've been married to my husband for, I think we're going on 29 years come this November. So he's definitely the love of my life, my best friend. Fun story. I met him within 2 weeks of moving to California. So I knew it was meant to be when the Lord brought him into my life that quickly. And like you said, we have two kids that are now grown adults. One's 25, one's 21. I like to say that, including the gray hair, I am a walking testament that homeschooling does work because both of my kids homeschooled, I like to say, from birth until graduation, and they're doing just fine. My daughter's got multiple degrees, and my son is graduating college as we speak. And so they're doing great. They're walking with the Lord. So lots of good right there. But how do we start our homeschooling? I definitely was not like you. I wasn't homeschooled as a kid. I was a public school teacher. And so I had no intentions of homeschooling. I didn't even know what it was actually until one day, one of the students in my middle school math and science class, his mom came and said, "We're done. We're out of here. I'm taking them out. We're going to homeschool." And I thought this lady was crazy. And that was like the first time the Lord like put it on my brain. And I was like, homeschooling, what is this? And it took a little while. It took for my daughter to be born and all that kind of stuff. But long story, once put her into a classroom, we just kind of went, no, we're gonna do this homeschooling thing. And my husband used to say, we'll take it 1 year at a time. But you know,
Yeah, famous last words, right?
20 years later, yeah. So, mhm.
Well, Carrie, how did your approach to education kind of grow and change over the years? I would assume coming from a public school background as a teacher, you may have come in with some assumptions about what homeschooling would look like. And how did you see that kind of grow or develop over the years?
Let's say it morphed. So yeah, I have a lot of friends who are teachers who decided to home educate, and we all have the same story. We come home and we start doing school at home because that's what we know, right? That's what we were taught. Many of us, like you, unlike you, we didn't homeschool, and so even if they weren't classroom teachers, school is what they know. So that's what I did, right? And so I feel bad for my eldest because the oldest is always the guinea pig, right? And so that first year, it was, textbooks and we're going to do it this way. And I didn't have her stand to say the pledge, but it was pretty regimented, And then little we morphed into classical kind of approach because it was still, that nice rigor kind of a deal, but not traditional. And then my son came along, and I realized, no, we need to do more of a Charlotte Mason. We need to really kind of tone this down a little bit. And then by my daughter's middle school, we were doing full on unit studies, eclectic. And then by the time my son was in high school, we were full on unschoolers.
That
So
is a
I went from
progression.
totally traditional to, all right, what are we learning this year and how are we going to do it? All right, let's do it. Let's hit the book. Let's do it. So,
I think that's really fun to just see how, as you kind of came into your own as the homeschool mom, and as you started working with your two different but unique children, how you just sort of figured things out along the way and you didn't feel locked in just to one particular way of doing things. I often will tell people like there's not just one right way to homeschool, which is true family to family. But sometimes it's also true just within your own family, right? There's not just one right way for your family, depending on the year, circumstances, family needs, and all that.
I had a closet full of books and resources that I saved for my daughter, thinking, oh, this worked wonders with her. I'm going to use these with my son. And well, you know what I did with those things in that closet.
Oh man, yes, I can relate to that for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Carrie, what were some of your favorite parts of homeschooling over the years?
Okay, I know this might sound a little cliche, but there were two things that were really my favorite parts. So one was getting to learn with my kids. I loved learning alongside them. And in a really interesting way, I feel like the Lord was redeeming my own education and my own walk of learning and giving me a new sense of wonder through our home education. Because I joke about this, but it's really not a joke. I didn't realize how dumb I was until I started homeschooling. And I was like, oh, wow, there's a lot of holes in my education. But instead of me looking at it as, oh my gosh, I can't do this, which of course in the beginning I did. That's what a lot of moms are. I'm not smart enough. I'm not good enough. That's all the lies they try to tell themselves, or they believe about themselves. But I took it as an opportunity to know, just tell my kids, I don't know, but let's go figure it out, or let's go find out, or let's go learn together. And a lot of the subjects that I absolutely hated in grammar school and high school and college wind up being some of my favorite subjects now to learn about. And I feel it's because of the homeschooling, right? So that I think is my favorite, just the privilege of being able to learn right alongside my kids. And I think the second favorite thing about homeschooling was the high school years.
Oh,
I
I
really
love to hear that.
thought when they were younger and they were playing with their mud pies and all that kind of stuff, yeah, that was fun and that was cute. And I thought, oh, it can't get better than this, but it does. God literally saves the best for last. And I know you've already graduated one. And so I think you can pretty much agree with me. The high school years are just, I don't want to say they're magical. There's just something about them that it's just beautiful. And it truly was the best part of homeschooling, was getting to be right alongside my kids as they were discovering who they were created to be. They were figuring out their passions and their purpose in life, and what God wanted them to do in his kingdom and how they were going to go about doing that, and to be there with them through the good stuff and the challenges when sometimes those revelations weren't coming as quickly as they would like, right? But I would say the high school year was by far my favorite.
I don't know if you've ever had this experience where you like read something in your private devotions and then you go to church and, there's a Sunday school lesson and then the sermon, and no one had like prepared ahead of time to coordinate these three things. But you're
Mhm.
like, I think I'm sensing a theme here. I'm feeling this way about actually this podcast season, which was kind of unintentional on my part, but it's become very evident as I've talked to so many moms who either have teens now or are veteran homeschool moms looking back. So many
Mhm.
again and again are saying those teen years, those high school years are so precious. They're a joy. It's a gift. Like this is a wonderful part of homeschooling. Like I'm getting goosebumps actually thinking about it because I think both for moms who are close to that, right? Who are maybe worried about the teen years, that's going to be an encouragement to them. But to the young mom listening, I hope that also gives
Mm.
her this vision that like those things you're doing now in the little years, they're going to pay off, it's worth it. And I think that's kind of neat that that's just coming up again and again. So I love hearing that from you.
Good. I'm glad.
Okay, so all these wonderful parts of homeschooling, right? But I
Yes.
mean, it's sometimes a little tricky. We cry in our coffee sometimes, right? So what were some of those challenges you faced when you were homeschooling, and how did you seek to overcome those challenges?
That's a very loaded question because this could be a whole podcast episode by itself. But on the flip side of what was my favorite part, I think one of the most challenging seasons for me personally were the younger years when there was so much energy and toddlers and babies and diapers and piles and stuff. And you took on this extra role of home educating. And those years can be really, really hard. They really can. And so I think for mamas, if they just, first of all, give themselves grace, they got to give themselves grace, right? And to also keep in mind that just because something's hard doesn't mean they're doing it wrong. And that season can be really hard because everyone is sleep deprived. Everyone is hungry all the time, including mama. Got to watch those blood sugar levels, right? Because hangry mom is not a fun mom. So I would say those younger years were pretty challenging. But like you said, um, it's just a season, and you're building a foundation, you're digging those roots, and you may not see the fruit for a really, really, really long time, but the fruit will come because the Lord, He promises that. But I think the other challenge for me, but I think for a lot of moms, no matter what stage of homeschooling they're in, burnout is huge, is huge. And I think burnout for what I my thoughts on this is that burnout comes faster and more often when moms do try to do school at home. When they look at it as homeschooling and not home education, right? And so when they're trying to replicate something that didn't work in the first place, or when they're trying to replicate something that's following standards that don't meet their family standards and God standards, it's gonna be, there's gonna be some conflict there. It's gonna be hard and you're gonna burn out. And so I think doing school at home is part of that, but also the comparison game. And that kind of comes with the school at home because even when moms stand back and go, okay, there was a reason why we didn't want to do the traditional school system. So why am I doing all of the same stuff here? But then they see their neighbors and their kids are doing this, and maybe even some of their homeschooling friends, their kids know this and can recite this and can do this, and their kids can't. And so our natural tendency is to go, oh, well, maybe we do need to pull it back and do more, structure at home. Maybe that's the problem. And I'm not saying structure's bad. I'm just saying if we change our mindset that we're not teaching curriculum, we're teaching children, right? And we're not doing school at home. Everything is an education. So from the moment you wake up to the moment you go to bed, your kids are learning something. And so, yeah, I think just changing the mindset and again, giving ourselves grace and not giving in to the comparison goes a long way to battling the challenges.
I think both with comparison or with, laying this whole list of things you think school needs to look like, both of those things come down to a bit of almost an idolatry, right? Where we're so worried, is God going to be pleased with me? Am I going to be a good enough mom? Like all of these things that we're like, okay, I've got to meet all of these checklists, right? This burden that we have placed on ourselves. And I think that's why the gospel brings such peace and hope in the midst of those seasons of burnout or where we've put a bigger burden on ourselves than God has. because I love to remember that God can't be more perfectly pleased with me no matter what I do, because he's already perfectly pleased with me for the sake of Christ. And so if homeschool moms can remember they're already perfectly loved, right, by God, and he's already perfectly pleased with us for Christ's sake, like that just takes that burden off of trying to achieve more, do more, meet some artificial standard. And that doesn't mean, of course, that we don't like want to do a good job and be faithful stewards of our children and their education. But there's such a difference of doing that out of freedom and
Mm-hmm.
peace and doing it as this burden that we have to bear.
Mm-hmm. Amen, sister.
Yeah. Okay, well, Carrie, one of the things I like to do with my guests is sometimes ask them like, "Hey, if you were going to ask yourself a question, what question would you want to answer?" And this question you left for me was very tantalizing, and I want to know the answer. So you said to ask you this question. What are the two most important words that you have added to your vocabulary because of homeschooling?
Why, I'm so glad you asked me that question, Amy. Okay, they're two very small words, but the words yet and yes. And the story behind them is the word yet. Um, I was working on my computer. I'm always working on the computer, right? Trying to get my new website up, and it was like 2, 3 hours I was working on this, and I was so frustrated because I swear I have this technology force field around me. So I'm surprised this interview is like going great because usually something happens. So I'm frustrated. I slammed my computer down, the cover down, and I said, "Oh, I'm just not good at this tech stuff." And my daughter was home, and she was in the kitchen, and she walked behind me, and she whispered, "Yet," and started to walk out the room. And I went, "What? What are you talking about?" She goes, "Mom, you may not be good at this technology stuff yet, but you will be. You'll get there." And I went, "Oh." She like totally changed the challenge or a problem with one word into a goal or a promise, something for me to work towards. And so it reminded me of the Bible verse, with the Lord, all things are possible, right? And the Lord's not done with us yet. Basically, that's my paraphrase of, the Lord's not finished with us. And so yet is definitely a word I added into our homeschooling, especially when it came to graphia. And so sometimes both he and I just had to sit back and go, "Okay, son, you may not be able to do this just yet, but you will. You're going to get this. This is going to be part of your story, part of your testimony. The Lord's going to use this." And so I feel like that's a very powerful conjunction, that word yet. And so that was one of them. And then the other one is yes. And the reason I say that is because I know in today's world, we're supposed to say no a lot to our kids because, they need to learn that there's a time and a place for things. However, they hear no a lot. And so when they got to be, especially in their teen years, I realized how important it was to just say yes. So when they came like at midnight with, "Mom, can I talk to you about?" "Yes, what's up?" Or, "Mom, can you come with me to?" "Yes, let's do it. How can I help? Where are we going? What do you want me to listen to?" And so I just realized that sometimes our kids just want our undivided attention just for 5 seconds. The phone's down, the computer's away. They just want to connect with us. And we need to be able to just put everything aside for a little bit and say, "Yes, let's spend some time," or "Let's talk," or "Let's do this." And now that I'm a mom of adult children, I love that word even more because when they do call and say, "Mom, do you have?" and I go, "Yes." "Come over for dinner. What you need? What do you want me to do?" So even as an adult of an empty nester, I really love the word yes now.
Oh, I love that. I think that's such a powerful and simple reminder. We can get so locked into our to-do lists or just the
Mhm,
busyness of the routine. But
mhm.
just to remember to take that pause, to focus on that person. I remember one time interviewing Misty Winkler, and she said that she, for a while, like literally put on her to-do list, smile at my children, which sounds silly, but sometimes we just get in this zone, this work zone, do the next thing. And just like taking
Mhm,
that minute, stop, turn and look at your child in the eye, smile at them, say yes, listen, because that relationship really
mhm,
matters. Yeah.
mhm.
Well, now that you're kind of looking back, you have this hindsight of having gone through the homeschooling years and now you have adult children. What would you want to say to your younger self before starting to homeschool?
Just breathe and chill out. Oh my gosh, I was on the homeschool hamster wheel or the crazy train, whichever version you want to look at, for far too long. I just wish I would have hit the pause button a long time ago. And I wish I would have listened to those mentor moms that when I went to Park Day with my little ones who were full of energy, right? And I'm pulling my hair out because I was just relieved I got there and everybody was in one piece, right? And I actually remembered to bring their shoes, right? Um, and the moms would look at me and say, "Oh, honey, don't worry. Just enjoy this season. Before you know it, they're going to be grown and out the house." And I'm thinking, you people are crazy. You don't know what I left behind. You don't know the pile of dishes, the laundry, what it took to get me here. But I really wish I would have taken that advice a long time ago, and to not push and to rush, right? To rush out the door, to push the kids. I mean, the Lord created us and our kids to be learning machines. So in my mind, homeschooling is really all about instilling a firm foundation and belief in the Lord and building relationships with our kids. And the academics is the icing on the cake. I mean, it comes. It's gonna come. The kids are gonna learn. They're gonna leave the house and they're gonna know how to wash their own clothes and read books and be able to vote. And so I think that would be the main thing is to just breathe and enjoy um, the mess while it's there because
Yeah.
before you know it,
It
it's going to be a pretty
reminds
clean
Yeah, it
house.
reminds me of I was so stressed. Okay, well, I'll just say I'm good at many things. Potty training is not one of them. I've done it 5 times. I did a terrible job all 5 times. Like, I don't know what it is about me not being able to potty train. But I remember just being so stressed out with that first couple kids. Like, just really, really stressed about the fact that potty training was not going the way I thought it ought to. And comparing, of course, to friends and family members who like had these magical little potty trained babies practically. And I was like, ah. But then as they got older, I realized, you know what? Like all of them eventually figured it out. And by the time they're like 5, 6, 7, no one is asking you the question anymore. When did your kid start potty training? Right? Like, no one asks your high school graduate. So, how old were you when you were potty
Not
trained?
on the job applications, that's for
Right?
sure.
No, this is not something we put on the transcript. Okay.
Hmm.
And I wish that I had had that perspective, of course, sooner. But I
Hmm.
think that's probably similar to a lot of other things, learning how to read, finally
Hmm.
getting that fraction understanding, being able to multiply and divide fractions, like whatever it is, we put so much pressure right there in the moment and forget that eventually they're going to figure it out. We're going to get there. And eventually no one is going to care when it happened.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember going into my son's freshman year of high school. One of my good friends who had been there, done that, she had graduated her kids, and she says, "Oh, you have 4 more summers left." And I went, "Oh my gosh, I have 4 more summers left." So it's just kind of that perspective of everything is going to change. And change doesn't mean bad. You change in a good way, right? They're going to be launched, but wow, I only have this sacred amount of time, um, just a little bit longer. And then the moms, like you said, who are in the middle of potty training, they can't think that far in advance, but trust both of us if you're listening. Just chill, just breathe.
Well, what is it like transitioning from homeschooling mom to mom of adult children, right? I have graduated my oldest son a couple years ago. He is growing in his adulthood. I love seeing the godly young man God is making him into. My daughter is going to be graduating, Lord willing, this year. And it's
Mhm.
just it's a different kind of transition. And so just selfishly, I would like to ask, please give me all your tips for launching big kids, transitioning into this new phase of motherhood.
Well, I will say that just like when they move into the high school years, your role changes from primary teacher to mentor and personal assistant, where you're kind of, they're telling you what they want to do, what their goals are, and you're kind of helping them do it. Once you launch them, you really are, um, you become literally their biggest cheerleader and their biggest prayer warrior. Those are like your two biggest roles and most important roles at this point, because you just kind of have to trust that, everything that you did and the Lord was working on, that it's gonna, they're gonna hit the mark when you launch them. So, um, and I used to think those sleepless nights when they were babies was tough, but I actually sleep less with
Great.
grown adult kids. But I do fall asleep. But you really get this realization of, I have no control. This truly is in God's hands. Whereas before, when you were homeschooling them and they were still under your roof, you still had some level of control and, some stuff that was happening. But once they launch and they're on their own, you really have to trust in the Lord, and you're on your knees literally a whole lot more. And so that's kind of the more challenging part of it. But I do love this season, because that hard work we were talking about earlier of, building those roots and digging deep, and sometimes you don't see any fruit. This is the season where you get to sit back and you get to watch that tree just bloom, and you get to see fruit that you're like, oh my gosh, that really did take root. And then you get to see them like totally enjoy being or fulfilling those dreams that they have, and their purpose in life. And just watching my daughter, she's a therapist, and just watching her do what she really felt the Lord was calling her to do. And even though it's hard and it's taxing on her, personally, because that's a hard job, she is just filled with so much joy, because she really feels like she's doing what the Lord has called her to do. And so as a mom, I'm like, okay, so yes, all of it. It was good, it was worth it. And so I love the front row seats that I have now of watching them just become who God created them to be.
Yeah, it's really exciting to see God working in your children. We
Mhm.
have this like delusion of control when they're little. And then, that quickly is removed as they begin getting
Mhm.
older. But then to see that, I was never the Holy Spirit of my children, right? And
Mhm.
to see God working in them, that's such a fun thing. So,
Mhm. I will say though, I put in my speaking packet for next year a whole new topic called Now What?
mm,
Because I realized when I was transitioning from homeschooling mom to retired homeschooling mom, none of my mentor moms prepared me for, what do I do now? Now what? Because you're not quite there yet, but when you literally devote 20 plus years of not just mothering your kids, but home educating your kids, and then you remove that hat, you're kind of like, huh, now what does God want me to do? You know what I mean? And sometimes we're so in the moment of teaching our own kids, we're not thinking, we're thinking, I have 4 more summers left. I have 3 more summers left. I have 2 more summers left with my kid or my kids, not, ooh, what does God have for me on the other side of this? And so I think it's real important that moms start to pray about and think about what's their maybe last kid or two, start getting into that high school years. Okay, it's their time to launch, but I think I need to start preparing myself for my new launching. And what is that gonna look like on the other side of it? So I think it's a topic because a lot of moms come to me now with that question. A lot of my friends who are now retired and they're like, I don't know what to do. That was my whole life. And usually your whole community and your friend base is your homeschooling friends. And so when everybody graduates in the same time frame, there goes your community sometimes, And so it can be really hard. It can be really hard. So
Yeah, I'll
just something for
definitely,
mamas to be thinking about.
yeah, I'll have to come back and pick your brain about that in a few years. I thankfully I still have a 9-year-old, so I have a little bit
You
longer.
have you have quite a few summers left.
Yes, yes. But I think too, especially if you've put your whole identity in
Right.
homeschool
Mm-hmm.
mom, right?
Mm-hmm.
That will be probably a really big, hard transition. So probably a good reminder even now while I'm here in this season to have that not be my identity, like my
Right.
identity being in Christ, right?
Right.
Not in this one part of my vocation right now. So yeah. Carrie, this has been just absolutely delightful. I cannot wait to share this conversation with folks. But here at the end, I want to ask you the questions I'm asking all my guests this season. And the first is just, what are you personally reading lately?
Okay, I was so excited. I wanted to share it with you. It's called How Many Times Do I Have to Tell You by Rachel Carmen. I love this book. She takes all those things that we're constantly telling our kids, like be nice to your brother and sister. But then she relates it to actually, that's what God's trying to tell me. How are you treating your brothers and sisters in Christ? And so she turns all of those things that we're constantly telling our kids every day, all day long, into, maybe that's what God's trying to tell you, my sister. So it's a great book. It's by Rachel Carmen. It's a short read. It's easily you could get through a couple of little chapters or lessons a day. It's fun.
It sounds encouraging and convicting, both.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
All right. Well, the final question is, what would be your best tip for helping turn around a homeschool day or maybe season that seems to be going all wrong?
Two things. Memorize Isaiah 54:13, which says, all your children will be taught by the Lord, and great shall be their peace. So I had to memorize that and hang it up everywhere. So on those bad days or in the bad seasons, I could be reminded that it really is the Lord who's doing this, and I just have the privilege of coming alongside. And the promise is something I held on to. Great shall be their peace. And so that's one. And then the other one is very practical. On those really bad days, if all you do are two things, read from the good book, the Bible, and read from a good book, any good chapter book, it's a good enough day. And there's always tomorrow.
That is a fantastic tip. Carrie, this is wonderful. Please let everyone know where they can find you all around the internet.
Yeah, it's easy if you just go to my website, coffeewithcarrie.org, and that's where you can find everything. I'm on Instagram at Coffee with Carrie Consultant, my podcast, Coffee with Carrie Homeschool Help. You can find that at my website. Yeah, we also have a membership now, an online community that you could be a part of where we do a lot of fun stuff and Bible study. But all of that stuff, my blog, all that kind of stuff can be found at coffeewithcarrie.org.
Fabulous. I will have those links in the show notes for this episode over at humilityanddoxology.com. If you are listening or watching, I would love for you to take a minute to pass this episode along to a homeschool mom friend that you think could use this encouragement, this hindsight perspective, the wisdom of Carrie today. And if you're listening in your podcast app, please take a moment to leave a rating and review. And if you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss the rest of the homeschool conversations this season. Carrie, it was lovely to chat with you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.